Welcome back, y'all. Your midnight movie this week is Carnival of Souls from 1962. This is, in my opinion, foundational horror. It is also, in my opinion, one of the first true American homegrown art house horror films ever made. And based on my research, I think this might be one of the first true films with a final girl. I think we tend to think of the final girl as coming out of slashers, but I think it actually might be Carnival of Souls. For those that aren't familiar, Carnival of Souls is an American kind of neo-noir psychological horror film, again, made in 62, and filmed not on either coast, but filmed between Lawrence, Kansas, and Salt Lake City, Utah. And the thrust of the film really is carried by one character, one incredible actress, Candice Hellegloss, who plays our lead character of Mary Henry, who at the start of the film is hanging, joyriding with some of her girlfriends, and they're approached by some guys that want to drag race. And of course, them being young, irresponsible people, decide to race. As a result, there's, I'm not spoiling anything here, by the way. There's a terrible crash, and the sole survivor of it is Mary. Shortly after her surviving, just by the skin of her teeth from the crash, she is drawn to an old amusement park, an old pavilion that has sort of like Moorish type architecture. Maybe to me, it's sort of reminiscent of like a Russian Orthodox church, or again, maybe a Moorish temple. And she's drawn to this place called, I believe in real life, it's the Saltaire, or was called the Saltaire Pavilion, there in Salt Lake City. She's drawn to this place that's been abandoned for who knows how long. And she is approached by and starts seeing specters, ghouls. From this point on, she isn't sure what to make of it. Realizes that she's sort of, she has made it out of a really rough situation by the skin of her teeth, and relocates to a new city to start fresh. And once she gets there, she finds she's having a really hard time of getting to know people. She's not really fitting in. She does meet a kind doctor who notices her in a park, having kind of an episode which today we would probably call PTSD. And he's a kindly therapist, psychologist, who basically diagnoses that she's had a terrible shock. Who would have thought, being in a car accident, and kind of becomes a quasi help to her over the course of the film. In addition to that, she rents a room, and she's kind of followed by this guy who pretty much becomes a creep. And unfortunately, she's kind of all alone, so she kind of entertains the guy and so forth. And over the course of the film, we see her trying to go about her life and trying to connect with people, and uh, keeps running into or having visions of specters, ghouls, ghosts, and she's not sure what to think of it. So the film is really sort of a psychological mystery on her part. There are allegories to PTSD. Again, they didn't call it trauma in those days. There is some type of a supernatural element that's sort of woven through the entire film. What's really impressive about this movie is, again, and we wouldn't necessarily think that Carnival of Souls is anything special, because we have now 70 years of horror cinema with sort of similar premises thrown at us for a long time. So we take it for granted. But Carnival of Souls was a super low budget movie that achieves a lot of really cool, interesting effects, merely by using camera, reverse or sped up film. It's all in black and white, so it really does have that Night of the Living Dead sort of feel. Not in terms of having the same sort of severity. It's a much more ethereal film, but you really feel like you're inside of a dream. This is, so much of Italian horror, for example, is, people always sort of describe that type of horror film as dream logic. This movie, in so many ways, is dream logic. It sort of seems to be somewhat influenced by some sort of German expressionism. But whereas German expressionism, I think it's kind of weird. You can watch this movie, Carnival of Souls, and not have any previous exposure to world cinema, the history of cinema at all. This is a fun sort of comfort horror watch. This is the type of movie that I would see on local Chicago TV growing up as a kid. Played in the same programming block late night on weekends with Night of the Living Dead or Coma or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, any of the old Universal monster movies. But where this film really separates itself from horror movies that came before it, much like Night of the Living Dead, is it's more than just a couple of filmmakers getting together, making a scare picture, and then dumping it into either drive-ins or cinemas just to make a fast buck. The screenwriters of this film really were truly inspired to make something unique and special. One of the guys who created it, he had passed the Saltaire Pavilion and was on his way back from California. He was making Centron educational films before he got into making this film. And he was coming back from California, making educational films. He saw the Saltaire Pavilion, this unique architecture, sort of abandoned, sort of in the middle of nowhere, and is like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do here, but I want to shoot some type of a scary picture. That's exactly what he did. He basically wrote this entire film around a location. And I don't know how often that had happened before in American cinema. You look at some of these older horror and sci-fi pictures, and they're not anything groundbreaking to us necessarily, but some of them are. And what I think is so interesting and why you should watch Carnival of Souls is it just isn't the way it's shot. It doesn't feel like a movie of the time. Again, this is 1962. The camera angles. There's moments where it feels like reality is kind of like melting or merging. This and the character of Mary Henry is, she's having flashbacks, or she's, it could be a result of, the accident. She's having difficulty. How the film shows that with camera angles, changes in lenses, really sort of rear projection. I think there's some rear projection in this film. Is really, really clever. It's a definition of an atmospheric horror film. I use that word all the time. I'm trying to find synonyms for it, but really there's no better way to explain it. That you turn this movie on, and I think there's some people who are turned off by black and white. They're turned off by quote unquote old movies. But everyone that I've shown this to, including nieces and nephews of mine that are used to watching the Conjuring movies, you name it, are pulled in and their attention is held. And just like Night of the Living Dead, that's probably one of the better pairings if you're going to do a double feature of classic horror, Carnival of Souls and Night of the Living Dead, because both of them are very visionary films. Carnival of Souls, one, it has this really strong female protagonist in the character of Mary Henry, played by, again, Candice Hilligoss. And she has a very unique look. She's not classically Hollywood pretty, but she is a pretty woman. She has these big eyes. There is this sort of ethereal intelligence to her that you can't take your eyes off her. She's very pale. She has blonde hair, and then these big eyes. And despite the fact that she's human, she really kind of fits in this film of ghouls, ghosts, specters, dark corners, hallucination. I wish she had done more horror. She's really good, this woman, but we got what we got. So if you are someone that likes unique, off the beaten path, if you are interested in film history, I remember the first time I watched Carnival of Souls all the way through as an adult. I took this movie for granted as a kid. They're legit, real jump scares in this movie. I think this might be one of the first jump scare movies ever that as a kid, I would only watch this movie up to a point, into a couple, like once, a ghoul shows up, because they kind of just stand there and stare at you, which is way scarier than necessarily being, I don't know, chased by a zombie. As a kid, I'm like, yeah, I'm done. I'm out. I'm going to go and read a comic book or something. It really does have that effect. And after not having watched it for maybe a decade and a half, watching it as an adult, I was really impressed at how disorienting, how truly creepy it is. It's not a gory film. That's, if for those of you that do, like me, really love the original Night of the Living Dead, if you're a Romero fan, it is not a gory film. Every all of it is show, a textbook example of show me, um, show me, don't tell me, and it really, man, it delivers. I'm trying to think of, there are films that have 10 times the budget as Carnival of Souls, have uh, jump scare every 10, 15 minutes, have all the budget in the world, that don't nearly come close to the ethereal, atmospheric, ghostly, otherworldly feel of Carnival of Souls. At the same time, while it is ethereal, atmospheric, ghostly, it really does ground itself as well. You're you have the feel of a gothic horror film. You don't have the aesthetics of it. There's no castles, there's no old mansions on the hill. This is definitely not a Vincent Price movie. You have sort of suburban America. You have downtown with a pharmacy and a soda fountain. You have gas stations. All the while, you have Mary sort of dealing with um, this seeming bleed between two worlds, one real, one supernatural. And that, I think, is part of the brilliance of this movie. Is this guy could have probably found an old farmhouse, old mansions somewhere there in Kansas or Utah, and done what we would consider sort of a proper gothic horror. But he didn't do that. He gave us something that's definitely more modern, very contemporary feel. A young woman hanging out with her friends, having an sort of industrial accident on a bridge, narrowly escaping with her life and trying to build a life thereafter. It's almost sort of things that would happen in a traditional horror movie, where people are sort of, all the death comes at the front of this movie, with the exception of one survivor. That almost always kind of comes near the end. You're knocking people off one by one until you get the final girl. We start with our final girl at the beginning, and we watch her deal with, again, what they didn't call then, but what we know today as PTSD, traumatic stress disorder, and working her way through that. I can't think of another film that does that. All the while, um, to do with budgetary reasons, while they couldn't do tons of scary and spooky locations. They did have the Saltaire Pavilion. They did have the perpetual organ music. That's something to know about this movie too. What really makes this movie and pulls it together is the score, which is all organ music. And that's probably the most gothic piece of this film. You have, Mary, by the way, is an organist. She stops by an old church, again, trying to put her life back together after the loss of her friends and coming through, a really bad situation. She checks out the church, talks to the pastor, and plays the organ for a bit. And yeah, it's creepy, it's ethereal, it's fun. It's not quite, but it almost has a tinge of religious horror to it. There's nothing in the movie, there aren't tons of churches, tons of crosses. There's not visions of angels, but they're that feeling, which again, credit to this film, that it's not a religious horror film, it's more psychological, but it has the feel and certainly the sound. The sound of church organ really pulls it together. I don't think this movie would have had the impact that it does if you take that music out. You put something more like contemporary strings, like you had in a lot of those films of the time. It is a total package. This film was not, again, not necessarily embraced when it came out. I think in the 80s it was reviewed by people like Roger Ebert and sort of the cadre of, lackluster, semi unsatisfied middle-aged men critics that uh, didn't really appreciate it for what it was. But over time, like other films, audiences have seen this film for what it is and see the masterpiece of psychological horror, of what it is, the foundational horror that it is. You watch this movie once, especially now, if you've been watching horror movies for the past 20, 25, 30 years. And there are benchmark uh, horror films made in the last 20 years that straight up steal from this movie. I don't have a problem with that. I think you should go from the best. You know, if something works and you can use it in a particular way for your film, nothing wrong with that. That's how original this movie is. That contemporary filmmakers of names you would know, and I'm not going to drop any names because it might spoil how this movie unfolds and resolves. But yeah, it is a massive influence on so many of horror films that have been made over just the last 20 years, not to mention by the last 40. Anything having to do with young woman in trouble, um, people dealing with supernatural phenomenon, people dealing with a shock, maybe people who have a psychological problem. Uh, any of that in contemporary horror owes a debt of gratitude to Carnival of Souls, in my opinion. This movie's so original. It feel it. It's one of those movies now that has become gotten over sort of the jump scares. Having watched this movie at least once a year, I watch this movie probably every Halloween for maybe the last several years, and it's become a comfort horror for me. This is one of those movies I can put on, Night of the Living Dead, um, maybe a handful of others, Twilight Zone the movie, and just fall asleep. I can literally take a nap to this movie. And I don't mean that in a way that it's boring, because it's not. If you've never watched this movie, I guarantee you're going to get sucked in. You're not going to be able to sleep to it. But this is one of those movies I like to have on in the background. It's good fuel for me for some of the writing that I've done, you know, stories, horror, screenplays. Uh, it's proof that you don't have to go for guts and the blood and the gore and the splatter. I would say this movie might be a good double feature with something like John Carpenter's The Fog, which is another super underrated ghost story from its time, just flawlessly executed. And I just get annoyed with people who love John Carpenter. Don't watch that movie. It's a testament and a great example, like Carnival of Souls, of restraint, of showing not telling, of building a vibe, building a feel where you sort of feel it on the back of your neck in a good way. But if you need a little bit of Halloween, it's we're end of May, early June now. I can't recommend Carnival of Souls enough. It's if you've never seen it, you know, do right by yourself and watch it and share it with others. It's really just a special film. You could tell that the writers and the directors of the film really took care to make something special. Again, this wasn't just you know, another movie to just throw in the Cineplex and make some money. They really wanted to make something with people. Uh, Character of Mary Henry and her ordeal and her, you know, coping and going through it really is it's a sight to behold. It's a beautiful film. The sound, the look, the feel. This is everything that I love about not just classic horror movie, but horror movies in general. I wish we could get back to this type of filmmaking. You know, maybe we will. Let me know. You know, are you familiar with Carnival of Souls? Am I right? Is it everything that I say it is? Um, I really think it's benchmark foundational American horror. It's a true art house horror film. Is but accessible. You know, people hear art house and like, oh god, it's going to be boring, and I've got to interpret things. Not at all. This movie is completely accessible and a lot of fun. But let me know what you think in the comments below. See yous next one.